Welcome to the Enchanted Earth podcast, where you will hear stories of nature with the power to transform our lives. These sacred stories are begging to be shared now. So listen in as my guest today shares one of their own. Well, welcome today. I have with me Tim Walter, who is a dear friend of mine, and I'm excited to talk with him today about his experiences. Let me share a little bit about Tim. After 30 years in professional film and TV production, Tim now works as a house healer and alternative life coach. Fundamental to Tim's spiritual journey was the rediscovery of the role of subtle geomantic fields of the earth and at the quantum level in the creation of our reality. Co-author of Spirit and Earth, a handbook for modern holistic living, Tim hosts a successful YouTube channel on which he shares his experiences of the power of place he often refers to as reality engineering. Welcome, Tim. I'm pretty sure I connected with you via your YouTube channel.
I think you did, yeah, some years ago.
Yes, and it is, I highly recommend checking it out. Tim always has some amazing information, and I'm excited for you to share a little bit about your story and about your views of our connection to the fabric of reality.
Well, I'll do my best.
Where should we start?
Well, given that we're primarily talking about the power of nature, as well as that kind of mystical side of things, there was a lovely experience that my wife and I had at a particular location in Scotland, which was an area called Kilmartin Glen. So we can talk about that if you like. And it's recognized as a pretty sacred site. This was a time we visited there, maybe even 20 years ago. My wife and I went there. Kilmartin Glen is recognized as being a space in Scotland. It's a little bit south of Oban on the west coast. And it's a space where Knights Templar activity was quite pronounced. So way back in the medieval times, the Knights Templar, when they were fleeing basically from persecution from the church, a lot of them came to Britain, and a lot of them went to Scotland. And Kilmartin Glen is actually a manufactured opening. It's a manufactured valley. You can see the way that it's been physically adjusted to have a very symmetrical shape. It's probably about a mile or 2 miles long. Memory is a bit vague, but at one end of it inland, you've got a church, and you look directly west towards the coast. You can see how symmetrical this valley is, and it's amazing. Now, the key thing is that there are standing stones in that valley. And my wife and I, we basically entered that site and were in, a decent headspace to be able to kind of tune into the earth intuitively anyway. And my wife she's very switched on in this sort of sense, but she doesn't really kind of talk about it a lot. I tend to kind of come across things and talk to her, and she says, yeah, of course it's like that. Don't you know that? It's like, come on, get with the program. So anyway, but to this particular day, she was like really taking the lead with me and saying, right, let's just walk down here and just follow this. Look, can you feel the way that the ancients, would have processed in this space? So we started walking and following the processional way. I had my dowsing rods because that's the easiest way that I can tune in. So basically, I was following my wife, and we were discussing what we were feeling, and what she was actually experiencing was she could see this entire sacred site area, which has got some massive standing stones in it and some cairns. So in other words, spaces that clearly would have been very powerful vortices, but they've been kind of subdued with random rocks being put on them right. So we'll talk about that in a second. But basically, my wife could see hundreds, if not thousands, of people standing in this space in ceremony around the central area, which was a massive great rock, standing stone. So we walked to this massive standing stone, and it had on it cup and ring marks. That's what it is. So it's like a hollow, which is the cup shape, and the ring obviously is a shape around it. That. So this particular menhir has cup and ring marks on it. But what was very, very obvious, and it became almost like we were back hundreds of years ago in that moment of ceremony, was that the high priest or whatever it was that was taking the ceremony would have walloped the big stone with another lump of rock. So it would have resonated and made a particular sound, tuning into the earth in that way. But it was very, very clear. The image of this massive rock being hit with a stone to create the sound that resonated out in the waves was so clear. It was extraordinary. And there's a lot of question in archaeological circles about what do these cup marks mean? What do they represent? And it's pretty clear, that really they were fundamentally as a result of action on the stone, not necessarily for a visual symbolism, but because the action of hitting the stone with a rock was going to create the cup mark. And I think there's an author and a researcher, a guy called Paul Devereux, who talks about the singing stones and the sound of stones that they can make at ancient sacred sites. But that in itself, the power of that just being kind of like linking back in the time slip, if you like, to be present with bodies that just simply weren't there in the 3 dimensions. It was quite extraordinary. In discussing it with dear old Hamish Miller afterwards, he said, of course that's what cup rings are for. Of course, the Scots are canny. They know what they're doing. So it's like, of course, why didn't anybody think of this? So Kilmartin Glen, it's actually a truly magical site. But just to go back to those cairns that I talked about that were covered in stones, there was a tremendous feeling of fear associated with the power of the earth, and those that kind of felt they had authority were so scared by the power of interacting with the earth and working with consciousness, because that's really the key here, that they disrupted the flow of energies at that site by simply throwing rocks in a random fashion into the spaces that had before that been very, very carefully crafted to be in harmony with the 3 dimensions of the soil, of the earth, of the stone, and of the landscape. But they basically disrupted the power by just randomizing stone into that space, which was in itself really an interesting, very interesting kind of gift from upstairs. When I would pick up the rods, that would simply activate my inner vision. So basically starting to douse with the dowsing rods would mean that I would not only get a response from the rods, but also get information, get a download within about what I was looking at and for. So in those particular instances, yes, I could basically get the sense of the vortices that used to be there before they were smothered. Yeah, and that was the same way with the people in the Glen as well. I was getting an impression of them, but not as clearly as my wife, bless her.
Wow. Well, that's really, really cool that your wife is on the journey with you. I know lots of people who really wish they had that partner, and I'm very lucky to have one as well, to explore and be open to the consciousness that we encounter.
Absolutely. I couldn't be doing this if I wasn't married to her. She's so incredibly grounded and practical. And we've been married 35 years.
Oh, that is really, really wonderful. And I'm just wondering, so, when we have these experiences in nature, when we, maybe the veil kind of lifts for a little, and and we can see deeper than we typically do in our everyday life. It is such a gift.
It is. And I think for everybody on a spiritual path, it's a part of that process of development in understanding that actually, we as human beings are so much more than we had thought we were up to that point. It doesn't matter how sensitive or not any individual is. If they go to a sacred site, a specific sacred site that's had ceremony over the hundreds of years, over the centuries, then if they go into that space with an open heart and willingness to accept what is given and who they are, then they will get a shift of consciousness. It'll happen. Uh, it's inevitable because that's the power of the place. So this is why, you know, these places are sacred because of the way that human beings have interacted with them. But part of human beings interacting at a sacred site in a sacred way, celebrating their creative potential, because that's what spirituality basically is understanding the true creative potential of the human being, the embodied human being through the heart. Everybody's going to get some kind of experience, some kind of shift of consciousness. And you get that by interacting with the earth energy that is at these places, which is simply the fields of geomagnetic energy that basically permeate absolutely everywhere, but they are most focused at these sacred sites because they may have had a concentration of energy and activity in the first place. In other words, they may have been a magical space to start with, which shamans would have discovered and come across and thought, oh, this is, let's use this, let's work with this space. And then that space, that energy would have increased over the hundreds of years because of the work that generations of shaman were doing at that space. Now, a lot of the way that sacred sites, sacred stone circles have been built, especially ones with the henge, which is the dip around the outside, a lot of that was built, 4,000 years ago or so, if we look at Stonehenge, that's sort of that era, it was built to start to harness and encase the energy for the purpose of creation, for the purpose of basically humanity saying, right, we know what we're doing with this. We're going to harness. Let's put a device in place here, keep it in place, stop this moving around because the lines do move and vortices change all the time. Of course they do in harmony with what's going on in the cosmos elsewhere. But humanity at some stage decided it was going to be in charge and started to harness it. So a lot of the sacred sites that we visit, such as Avebury in the UK, down in the south, they actually are a result of, unfortunately, very often we believe male energy saying, this is the way it's going to be. We're going to harness this. This is the construct. Now, I might be a bit out of turn saying it was mostly male energy because, of course, we've got a lot of goddess worship and there's a lot of feminine energy in the whole earth being. But then again, that is what is now being released, fortunately. And that whole aspect of feminine energy being released is absolutely vital to our experience of life on earth. But what I'm saying is that when we think about Neolithic stone circles as being active energy centers, they are active energy centers, but equally they're also, in archaeological terms, sites where actually our ego aspect of humanity has tried to limit and control and work with them, not necessarily always in a good way. So, and again, that's kind of typified by what happened at Kilmartin Glen.
I think there's just what you said about, kind of the masculine is harnessing like the energy, the divine energy of the earth for good, but it also could be for ill. And it all depends on intention and what they're really trying to get from the earth, what they're trying to do.
One of the key things is that, people, especially when they open up originally, if they haven't been familiar with a spiritual way of looking at life. But at the moment, we have a world, an environment where a lot of people are waking up spiritually. They're realizing that, oh, there's far more to humanity than we've been led to believe, blah, 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 right? Now, the thing is, what a lot of people don't realize is that, our connection to the divine and our connection to the creative process is constant, right? Now, it varies in its intensity and its ability to manifest what we expect and what we desire and all of those things. But the point is that we are constantly connected as human beings. We're constantly connected to that manifesting process. Now, earth energy is integral to that process, absolutely integral. And this is why earth energy is not just existing in lines. It's not just ley lines or weaving energy lines. It's not, there's not gaps between these lines. What there is a lesser concentration of it. So we are in a constant field, it's like we would be fish living underwater, because we are in it all the time, which means that we are constantly manifesting everything all the time, because and science accepts this as part of quantum physics. It's we project our reality. That's what we are. We are quantum processors that are receiving and projecting all the time. But it's done at the speed. It's far faster than the speed of light. It is constant. It's instant. Our feedback loop with the reality that we experience, it's constant. What this means is that we can't think of ourselves as individual physical human beings. We actually have to think of ourselves as a point of awareness or a wave, as an individual point of awareness, and a wave that is emanating out. We're transmitting our reality out from the point of awareness, from the cosmic consciousness at this manifest point in time. When two people get together, they are basically sharing their individual, if we want to use that word, waves, right? So right now we're sharing our realities, but we're also using an electronic device in order to share the waves that is actually our reality anyway. But if we didn't have this setup, the webcam and all of that, we could still communicate, telepathically, or send a message, if we were tuned in enough between you and I, and the process would work. The process of sharing the wave would be in action, and when we stop that communication, those waves are separate. We have to talk in terms of separation in our 3 dimensions that we exist in. But coming back to this point, if we're constantly connected, then it means that all of our subconscious processes, all of our emotional processes, all of our experiences that we're feeling are manifested immediately. Now, that's great if we're really lovely and open-hearted and living from a point of compassion 100% of the time. I don't know about you, Maureen, but I can't do that. Right? So as more and more people open up spiritually, what that means is that actually the creative power of each individual goes up exponentially, right? Because they become aware of their ability to manifest, but they forget that it's not just, oh, let me go to visit a sacred site. It's all the time. It's when they're cooking the meals for the kids. It's when they're going down the supermarket to get the groceries. It's when they're driving the car and being cut up by some git that's just driven in front of them. It's permanently switched on because it's a part of us. It's a part of our reality. And so when we have an impression of our collective species that appears to be kind of in a mess, it's because actually the signals that we're genuinely putting out into the cosmos are scrambled, unclear, not focused, they are a mess themselves. And that's what manifests, that's what comes back in our reality. But equally, the real reality that counts and matters, I use the word advisedly, the reality that actually matters is the one that you individually experience in and through your direct five senses. So when you walk into a sacred site, when you go to a Neolithic stone circle, or you go to a magical fairy ring, or you go anywhere that is highly charged with earth energy and highly receptive, and you're in the conscious state, or the subconscious state rather, of being able to interact at that level, your experience that counts and matters to you as an energy being is what comes to you through your five senses. And it doesn't matter whether you forget what that is instantly as soon as you step away from that space, or whether you hold it dear right from that moment for the rest of your life. The point is that that energy has gone into your energy system and made a change. And these points of change can be very, very, very small little instances. They don't need to be like exploring a major sacred site. They can be just small instances that kick us into a different shift of perception.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, there's so many gems that you just shared. So, what you just said there really echoes what this podcast is about and my books, because we can have an experience of literally just looking out of our office window and seeing a sunset, and that can trigger this profound connection to the co-creative energy all around us, right?
Yeah, I mean, the connection there is, the connection there is joy. It really is. It's a very deep emotional response that you get when looking at something of beauty in nature. As you say, the sunset can be extraordinarily moving, but fundamentally, what that's connecting to is that essence of joy, and that's what we're actually pretty good at pushing to one side to get through life.
I can't tell you how often I have to remind myself to look up, to, now I've become, in my older age now, I've become more of a birder, looking around at the trees as I'm walking and just spotting a hawk
Mm,
up in the tree.
absolutely.
And it's something that I would pass by. Even a few years ago, I wouldn't have noticed that majestic bird sitting up there perched, looking down at me.
We live fairly remotely, and I like you, I'm completely gobsmacked by how much joy I get from just keeping an eye out for the birds, and I feed the garden birds on a regular basis. But yeah, when you get a more unusual thing flying by, it's great. It's really is great. But you see, the thing is that we can quite easily kind of come to terms with the idea that another person is a reflection of an aspect of us. But again, we tend to forget that nature is reflecting back to us all the time. And so when we see a particular dramatic or glorious hawk, then it's reflecting an aspect back. It's saying something back to us. It's actually also really a part of us that is reflecting back us. Because so when I started house healing, what was really clear was how each individual really, on a very practical level, actually lives in their own universe. Now that universe is created by their belief system. So, you know, science, as far as I know, does not attribute energy, in other words, the power of change,
Right.
to something that's called belief. Now, I mean, I think virtually everybody that's watching this or listening to this has heard of Bruce Lipton's book, The Biology of Belief. But really, the fundamental structure of our universe, our individual universe, is created by what we believe. And there's loads of stuff in science. There's a neuroscientist called Donald Hoffman who wrote a book called The Case Against Reality. And the way that he interprets reality is that it is simply the desktop interface to the real truth behind it, which is not a new concept. It's a very spiritual concept, but he is a neuroscientist. But he identifies this as being part of the role of the way that we project our reality, and what we experience is the dashboard, is the interface of what's behind it. Now, when you're working with somebody and working on a healing energetic level, you are really working to the rules of their universe, because what we're doing is we are acting as the point of awareness for the management to enter and activate certain aspects of that individual's universe in order for well-being to come to the fore. What I mean is basically, that the management is helping them get better. So the reason this is important is because it means that our power over our own existence is in our own hands, because of the freedom of choice. Free will is a universal concept that is a fundamental law. We all have free will. We have free will to choose what our next experience of reality is going to be, because that's what we do as co-creators. That's what the reality that we experience is based on mostly on the subconscious and the expectation of what we expect to step into, what we expect to experience in the next nanosecond, because reality is created every nanosecond, or even smaller at time interval than that, through the interaction of the creative essence within here. It is then projecting the external reality. So no matter where or how deeply affected a person is, in theory, that can be changed by their own self-will. Except the fly in the ointment on that is that free will also applies to the stage of reality before we manifest as a human being on this planet. So in other words, before we're born, whatever we've agreed to experience in this life is one of the guiding aspects of the framework that we will experience. And so our choices down here on a conscious level, or even a subconscious level as a human being, are limited within the framework of the choices and decisions we made upstairs.
I agree.
I think part of the essence, part of the understanding of accepting that in a non-cruel way is this magical word detachment. Because when we put ourselves in the viewpoint of a being, an entity, an essence that actually has a wider experience of being alive than just being a human being, then the issues that we go through as a human being are put into perspective, because they are only a small part of the greater awareness of that being. And we are eternal souls, and that is our true essence. And so even the worst situations that we find ourselves in as a human being can be put in perspective in that picture. I'm not saying that I invite the worst into my reality. I'm simply saying that this perspective of detachment can be very useful for all of us in our search for understanding who we really are.
Yeah, it's pretty ironic. It's both detachment and connection that are needed.
Oh, exactly. Yes, it is. It's understanding that you are connected all the time, but then it's making the conscious detached viewpoint in the issue that we are caught up in, which is usually a human created issue.
No, that was very profound. So thank you for going off into that direction. I think that could be very helpful.
One of the things I would say as a kind of a wrap up is to always remember that as a creative being, as a co-creator, being connected to the divine and being influenced and in contact with the quantum field, the infinite field of possibility, which is what everything that we experience comes out of, including ourselves. So in being that creature that is in contact with not only the creative field of possibility, but also the divine, we step across those two kind of areas of existence. But in a sense, we can look at our lives as being a story because we're telling a story made up from that infinite field of possibility. And so all the features that we come across, all the things we talked about, the things that we can see in nature and the experiences we can have, that all stems from that infinite field of possibility, that quantum soup of possibility. But the thing to remember is that not only are we the story, not only are we the experiencing the story, but we're also the storyteller. Okay. So because we are that soup of possibility, we ourselves are infinite possibility, working with infinite possibility. And the guidelines and the framework that we create in are partly formed by the limiting archetypes of human consciousness that have been identified by Carl Gustav Jung and all of that, those sort of schools of psychology. So they exist within the framework of the overriding manifesting ability of the human species. But those archetypes can change. And as the more people become aware of what they truly are, then that's what changes, is the fundamentals of the basal paradigm of belief. The basal paradigm being the collective understanding of what's possible. So as humanity changes and as humanity accepts its role as a creative being in its truest sense, the limitations of what's possible in our 3 dimensions changes. And that's why we get this impression of ascension, or this impression of development of 5 dimensions living in this different experience altogether. And that's really what we're seeing. That's what we're experiencing now.
Oh, absolutely. So well said. Yeah, we're going through a huge process of transformation. And like you mentioned earlier, so many more people are waking up to this level of reality that has been subjugated for thousands of years, millions of years. And that is why I feel so strongly that being out in nature connects us to this higher level reality.
Mm.
It can really help us do that. And the language of metaphor and symbol is so important to help us realize, like you said, that hawk is us.
Exactly.
What does that hawk want to communicate to
Yeah.
us about our current situation, our
Yeah.
life? And there's so much help all around us all the time. We just have to open our eyes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Open our eyes and see, and just be open to whatever message it gives us.
Wow, what an amazing conversation. I love speaking with you all the time, Tim. It's been really fascinating. Do you have any last words?
No, I think I've said enough.
Well, I highly recommend following Tim on his YouTube channel. You're going to get this and so much more when you listen into his weekly broadcast.
I've actually been a bit neglectful of it. I'm trying to get back into doing more and more on there now, but yeah.
Well, if people start following you now, they have a whole library of videos to check in, and you'll see the link below this video to that. And thank you so much for taking your time to speak with me. Always a pleasure, Tim.
No, thank you, Maureen. Thank you for inviting me. It's been lovely.
Thank you for being a part of the Enchanted Earth podcast. Comment below, share, and most of all, please hit the subscribe button so that you'll hear when we publish another inspiring episode. You can visit us at luminous-spaces.com for more information on our online courses, retreats, and offerings. Thank you and have a magical day.